Is this the two best defenses in the country? Kansas battles Houston for Showdown atop the Big 12 standings. We preview the game.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here at D Johnson Radio, and thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of LOJ, we're previewing Kansas and Houston, a top 12 matchup overall, a matchup of two of the top teams in the Big 12. And are these the two best defenses in the country? We'll get into all that on today's episode, as well as the Houston Scouting Report, players to watch, matchups that could determine the game, and more. And we'll have a crossover episode as well for this preview coming out early Saturday as well. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. You can get tickets to the game. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time, where you can get in for $111. Right now I'm seeing upper baseline in Section 1 for $111, so check that out with Game Time. Okay, so KU takes on Houston. This is a 5:30 tip happening in Lawrence. And one of the big headlines coming into this one is, are these the two best defenses in the country? So right now you look at KenPom, and Houston comes in with the number one defense in the country with a rating of 86.7. That basically means their adjusted defensive rating based on the opponents they play, they're giving up an adjusted 86.7 points per 100 possessions. Okay, Duke is second, Tennessee's third, Kansas is fourth at 89.7. So you're talking about a 3-point swing there for Houston and Kansas, but then it's, a little over a 3-point swing would be the same distance of Kansas to fourth, and I guess like Illinois in ninth. So I don't know. But point being, you have Kansas and Houston both in that conversation if you're just looking at the overall numbers. Then you look at another site like Bart Torvik, for instance, which is another analytical site. And on Bart Torvik, Houston has the number one defense in the country. Kansas also has the number 4 defense in the country. Then, if I filter things down, though, to just since January 3rd, which would be Friday, January 3rd, so it would be before the weekend of games that happened the weekend of January 3rd. What's the importance of that? Well, that's when Shakeel Moore entered into the starting lineup for KU. And it's not just that he entered into the starting lineup, it's that he started playing real minutes, because it's not that he was playing 20 minutes per game off the bench, and now that he's a starter, he's playing, 25. He was playing, very sparingly, and now he's playing 20 minutes, 25 minutes a night, and starting for KU. And since that point, the number one defense in the country has still been Houston. The number 2 defense in the country has been Kansas. So you could make a real argument that right now, these are the 2 best defenses in the country. And yeah, I guess if KJ Adams isn't going to play, which is going to be the case, that maybe knocks Kansas down just a little bit without him defensively, but maybe they're better on offense. I don't know. So I don't know, maybe a battle to see who the best defense is in this one, but still no KJ for KU, which is unfortunate, because you would think in a game where you need to be tough, you need to be rugged, like this would be a matchup that KJ could be helpful, especially because Houston plays, they're not playing, I guess they have certain lineups with Terrence Arsenault at the 4 where he can shoot the 3 and stuff, but they're playing a lot of lineups of kind of 2 bigs who are non-shooters, right? And so I think it might help to a certain standpoint. And he was really good in KU's win versus Houston last year in Allen Fieldhouse. He had 10 points on 4 of 5 shooting. He had a team best 7 assists. He also had 4 rebounds, 1 block, and 1 steal. So it'll be interesting to see how they do without him. In this one, I think more so than either of the first 2 games with TCU and Kansas State. If Kansas has any hope of winning the Big 12 or being in the league title race, you got to win this game. Now, we can talk about the importance of it. Obviously, winning the Big 12 is no longer as important as it was when Kansas had the Big 12 title streak going, right, where you were trying to break NCAA records by having the longest streak of conference championships, right? There's not that same pressure to it. Also, because the league is so gigantic, because it doesn't feel like there's as much regionality with conferences anymore, where it's just like, I don't know, the realignment has made it so that it doesn't matter as much. Like, if I gave you the option right now of being let's say a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, but you finish, say, 3rd or 4th in the Big 12, right? Versus winning, I don't know. I guess winning the Big 12 is going to probably get you a 1 seed, right? So maybe that's. But let's say finishing 5th in the Big 12 and getting a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament because you're non-con and you have a good Big 12 tournament or something like that, right? Versus finishing 2nd in the Big 12 where you're just like a game behind first, but getting a 3 seed. Like, which one are you taking? I don't know. I think I'd rather just take the one where you get a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. So it is unfortunate in the imbalanced schedules, but still, you want to win the league. You're in the league. Of course, you want to hang another banner for a Big 12 championship, right? You're 2 games back right now of Houston, who's the only undefeated team in Big 12 play at 7-0 on the season. And so, I mean, there's going to actually be other teams like Iowa State and Arizona who are going to be rooting for Kansas in this game because you're running out of opportunities for Houston to lose. And so if you're Kansas, you lose this game, you'd have your 3rd loss. Houston would be sitting at 8-0. You'd be 3 games back, and you still have to go to Houston. That would be kind of a wraps on you most likely having a chance to win the Big 12 title. So if you want to still have a chance in it, you want to still be in that title race, win this game. And for what it's worth, like I believe this would be probably the first time under Bill Self that they haven't won it for 2 straight years, and it would certainly be the first time they weren't really in contention for 2 straight if you do lose this game. Okay, opponent scouting report. Houston comes in at 15-3 on the season. They are riding an 11-game winning streak, 7-0 in Big 12 play, and they've been dominant in conference-only games. They have the 2nd most efficient offense and the 1st most efficient defense. They're just balanced. They're very good. Overall in the year, they are top 15 on offense. They are number 1 defense nationally, and all 3 losses they've had were close to good teams. 5 against Auburn in a game they were up by, I want to say, a point or 2 late. They lost in overtime to Alabama, who's a really good team, and then they lost by 3 in overtime to San Diego State. And 14 of their 15 wins have been by double digits. So, like, they're just a very good team. You look at the personnel for Houston. Oklahoma transfer point guard Milos Uzan is 6'4". He is averaging about 9 points, 5 assists per game, over a steal per game, 44% from the floor, 36 from 3, 77 at the foul line. Big shoes to fill for Jamal Shedd. He hasn't been Jamal Shedd, but he's been a good player for them. Then you have 6'1" sharpshooting guard L.J. Cryer. He leads the team, 13.8 points per game. Elite shooter, 42% from 3, and also 94% at the free throw line. He's got a super odd stat sheet. Like, doesn't get more than 2 rebounds or assists per game. He's under 2 in both. He doesn't get more than a steal or block per game. He's below 40% on 2-point shots, but he's such a good 3-point shooter and just shooter overall that it just doesn't matter. He's still such a valuable player. Then you have Emmanuel Sharp, 6'3" scoring guard, who I think might be one of the most underrated players in the conference and honestly the country. He's going for 13.8 points per game, 3 rebounds, 1.3 steals, doing it very efficiently. 46 from the floor, 46 from 3, 93 from the free throw line. They also have Malik Wilson, who's a 6'3" senior guard. He'll kind of play all over the floor for all 3 of those guys. Shot it well, but low volume from 3. Terrence Arsenault is interesting, bouncy athlete. He plays the 3 and the 4 for them, depending if they want to play bigger or smaller lineups. He's getting over 8 points per game, getting good steal numbers, just 21 minutes per game, and shooting it well. 47 from the floor, 40 from 3, 72 from the foul line. The 3 big men that they mostly use, it is a combination. They're all 6'8". Jawan Roberts is 6'8", 235, but he has like a 7-foot plus wingspan. He's just super tough. One of my favorite players in the conference. 10.5 points per game, over 6 rebounds. He's at 55%. Not a super diverse offensive game, but he's a tough nose, will finish at the rim, play great defense, will rebound, will get putbacks. Really good player for them. Then they have Javier Francis, 6'8", 235. If you remember, he got hurt in the early going of the Allen Fieldhouse matchup. But he's at 5.5 points, 4.2 rebounds, 1.2 blocks. He's just a good defensive rebounding center. Again, not a guy who has a super diverse offensive game, but still impactful in other ways. 6'8", 230-pound JoJo Tugler. He's somebody who's popping up on NBA draft boards for them. The reason why, for a 6'8" center, is he has a 7'6" wingspan. So like Flory, I think, measures in at like a 7'2" wingspan. I want to say it was the report for Flory Badunga. So think about this. JoJo Tugler is like an inch shorter than Flory Badunga, and he has 4 more inches on his wingspan. He could probably tie his shoes without bending his knees. Not so much of an offensive threat, but 5.5 rebounds per game, 2.3 blocks per game in just 20 minutes per game. So I mean, basically between Francis and Tugler, they're getting constant elite defense, 10 rebounds per game, 3.5 blocks per game from their 2 centers. What Houston does well, they played a very slow, they're a boa constrictor, right? They played a very slow tempo. They're going to slowly grind you out. They're going to slowly strangle you, and that is what their defense does to you. And they're going to slow it down. They limit teams to just 4.4 fast break points per game, which is best nationally. Kansas themselves averages over 12 points per game in transition. So that'll be very different here. But it's the number one defense. They're a top 10 defense in turnover rate. They are a top 15 defense in steal rate. This is nationally. They have the number one defense in block rate, 2-point defense, and effective field goal percentage. So they're a boa constrictor. They will slow it. And then all of a sudden, they will strike with their fangs every now and then on the offensive end because they do have a really good three-point shooting team. They don't turn the ball over offensively. They crash the offensive glass with authority. They play tough, and they don't get the ball stolen. So you look at that combined with them being an elite three-point shooting team where they're hitting 39.9% of their threes. That's a top 5 rate nationally. That is a lethal combo. You completely shut teams down on the defensive end of the court. You force turnovers. You don't turn the ball over and get offensive rebounds. So what does that mean? You're winning the possession battle. You're getting more shots up than the opponent. When they are getting shots up, they're contested and they're not going in very much for the opponent. And when you're getting shots up, you're hitting threes at a very high rate. Now, where they've struggled with, even though they hit threes at a high rate, they don't take them at that high of a rate. So, maybe you can get away with a game where even if they do shoot, 35% from three, if it's a lower volume, they don't get to the free throw line well on offense. And they have not been that good at shooting 2-point shots. They are only shooting under 49% from two, which is outside the top 240 in the country. They are third in Big 12 only games in defensive rebounding, so maybe this is a strength, but nationally they rank outside the top 140 in defensive rebounding rate, which is still above average, but compared to all the things they're so good at, not quite as much as strength. All right, let's get into matchups of the game, players to watch. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, where you can attend the KU Houston game. Go to Game Time. You can filter on to the Game Time picks. You can filter on your all-in pricing tab so you don't have to be surprised at checkout. And boom, I'm looking at this where you can get in the upper corner $167 for what should be an awesome matchup between Houston and Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse. You can also get, if you're looking for AFC Championship tickets, you can do that on Game Time as well for the Buffalo Bills at the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, filter in the all-in pricing so you're not surprised. Click the Game Time picks. Going to give you some good stuff. If you got some extra, Christmas money lying around, you can get row 3, section 103, field sideline, $1,000 24 on Game Time, or you can just get into the building for $314 up in the corner in section 330. Do that with Game Time. You're not going to be surprised with the all-in pricing, and on top of it, you can see the pictures of your seat views. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing on with our KU Houston preview, we'll have a crossover episode further previewing this, and don't forget to check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, matchup number 1 for Kansas and Houston. Play tough, physical, and with energy. I think about this from a Kansas perspective. They haven't always played tough this season. They haven't always played physical this season. They haven't always played with energy this season. You would think late night tip on a Saturday night, not super late, but, a nighttime tip, I guess you would say, against a really good opponent coming into your building, you should have all those things that you should be ready to play with. But we know it's been a bit of a hit or miss thing with Kansas. And when they have played with that energy and physicality and toughness, they're a very good basketball team, right? It's when they don't, when they run into issues. And you're going to get punked if you don't do that against this Houston team. And I think it also applies to a couple different areas. Scoring at the rim, like that's somewhere where if you score at the rim well, like that can relate to toughness, right? Well, Kansas ranks 97th percentile nationally in getting 39.7 points in the paint per game. Houston's defense ranks number 1 in the country at holding teams to just 19.2 paint points per game. Can you be tough against tough defense and continue to finish over them, even though it's going to be more difficult in this one? Plus, teams are only shooting 53% at the rim against Houston. That puts them in the top 15 at the rim, compared to Kansas, who's shooting 69% at the rim, which is a top 40 number. So something's got to give there. You're going to have more contested shots with players with long wingspan. Can you show toughness and finish over them? Rebounding the ball. Houston gets over 13 offensive rebounds per game. They are in the 97th percentile in offensive rebound rate. Well, 2 of KU's 4 losses have been bottom 4 defensive rebounding games for KU, and 3 of the 4 KU losses have been bottom 4 offensive rebounding games for KU. When KU doesn't rebound the ball well, it probably correlates a lot with, hey, they're not playing with as much toughness and energy, so they're not rebounding as well. They tend to lose those games. Well, Houston will take advantage of it if you're not there. Defending the rim. Houston shoots almost 66% at the rim. That puts them in the top quarter of college basketball. So you better be tough in defending the rim because they're going to be coming in hard. Hustle balls. This ain't, all 50-50 ball stuff. Like, it is important. Kansas needs to win more of the 50-50 balls than they have been doing this season. And Houston has really turned those into advantage them. Get on the floor fast, get on the floor first. But also Houston, part of it is by them hustling, they're getting more second chance opportunities. Houston gets 14 second chance points per game. That is 94th percentile nationally. To KU's credit, they actually rank 85th percentile nationally in preventing second chance points on the defensive end. But I think that just speaks more to KU's just got a good defense overall. So it's going to help with that. But win those 50-50 balls, win those hustle balls. And then the last one here that I would include in this toughness and energy stuff, staying strong with the ball. Houston gets a ton of steals and turnovers, and they lead them into points. They're getting 18.7 points per game off turnovers. That is 96th percentile in the country. Now, again, Kansas has done a good job avoiding these, but let's bring that into matchup number 2, which is move the ball without turning the ball over. Houston's in the 96th percentile in steal rate. They're in the 91st percentile in steals per game at 8.7. And they're in the 100th percentile in Hakeem percentage. What is Hakeem percentage? It is a combination of your steal and block rates, right? So basically, how often are you causing chaos or, steals and blocks are very effective defensive plays, right? So they're the best in the country at it. Kansas is coming off a bad turnover game in Fort Worth, where they had way too many, I think 17 in the game. But honestly, Kansas has been pretty solid at avoiding them so far this season. It's a different animal playing Houston. And Kansas saw that both times they met Houston last year. So in the loss to Houston, Kansas had 18 turnovers. In the win against Houston last year, Kansas had 18 turnovers. But the difference, Kansas had 9 assists in the loss. They had 20 assists in the win. And you look at the game that they won in Allen Fieldhouse, Kansas shot lights out. They were making all their threes. They were hitting all the shots that they needed to hit. I don't think you can expect Kansas to shoot as well as they did in last year's matchup. So if you're like, okay, let's, what are ways if you're not going to shoot as well that you can still win this game? Well, okay, turn it over less. Win the possession game more. I want to say Houston only had like 3 turnovers or something. You had like 18. So have that be a little bit better. Maybe get those turnovers cut to 13 to 14 if you could. Continue to try to get high assist numbers. And the difficulty here is Houston is so aggressive. They blitz you, they double, they hedge. They do all these different things that make them such an aggressive defense that force these turnovers. You have to have really precise passing. You have to have quick ball movement. You have to have a good understanding of where you're going to go with the ball. You have to work it side to side, and you have to do it quickly while also being patient, while also threading the needle and being cautious. Like, it's a very difficult thing to do, and that's why Houston has the number 1 defense in the country. And a lot of those opportunities, you look at them having a top 15 offense in adjusted offense efficiency. I don't think they're actually a top 15 offense. I do think they're a good offense because they're so good shooting threes. But like realistically, if they weren't getting all these steals that were leading to easy runouts, easy layups off of turnovers, where would they be if you were just looking at like half court offense? It's not going to be as good. It's still going to be good, but it's not going to be as good, right? But the difficulty is for Kansas, you have to be aggressive to counter their aggressive defense. A lot of skip passes across the court. Those are going to tend to lead to more turnovers, but also you need to be clean at it because they thrive on those. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and that's part of what makes Houston so good. Number 3, guard the corner 3 and the paint. Houston doesn't take many corner threes, only 58 on the season. So that's like, 3 to 4 a game? But when they do, they go in. They're shooting 52% on corner threes this season. Now, beyond that, Houston is just 1-3 this year when they get held to 44% or below on 2-point shots versus 14-0 on the flip side. The UCF loss wouldn't have counted into this, but it was trending toward it. UCF shot 49% Houston shot 49% on 2-point shots in that game. So I'll be very interested to see how KU defends Houston, how they line up, right? Because Houston does play with 3 smaller guards around those 2 big men. And like, is KU, because there's 2, the biggest scoring threats are obviously Cryer and Sharp. Sharp is a little bit more built than Cryer is. Cryer's a little quicker and quick release, I would say, than Sharp. Does it make sense to put like Shaq Moore, who's got a little bit more strength to him, on Sharp, and then maybe put DeJuan Harris on L.J. Cryer? Or does it make sense to have Zeke? I don't know. I'll be very interested to see how KU kind of defends them. But yeah, you got to slow them down at the rim and from the corner from 3. All right, let's finish up here with players to watch. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the show. We'll be back at you for a crossover episode tomorrow for KU Houston. Get you ready. And then also we will recap the KU Houston game on your Saturday night. All right, players to watch for the Jayhawks against the Cougars. We're going to go with Hunter Dickinson against Houston's stud defensive centers. So Houston, obviously, they're 2 defensive centers in Tugler, who's got a 7'6" wingspan, and Francis, who's just an excellent defender himself. That's a heck of a rotation you can throw at guys. They are giving up some good height, right? I mean, I get it. The wingspan is there, but there is something to the idea of, okay, Hunter's 7'2". If the guy he's going up against is 6'8", even though the wingspan is going to be up there to block the ball, you have a more clear view of the rim by not having somebody's head right at your face, right? Does that kind of make sense? So I do wonder if Hunter is able to take advantage of that in any way, and he had a really good game for Kansas in the Allen Fieldhouse meeting last year with Houston. 20 points on 9 of 15 shooting, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists. Now, in the 30-point loss that they suffered in Houston, he had 11.6 rebounds. He did get hurt, though. Those numbers probably would have been better if that would not have been the case. I don't know. Does that lead to him having any PTSD of having the injury? I think it was the shoulder injury to where, if he tries to do what he did against TCU, that earned him a weird technical. Do you not do that against Houston knowing what happened last year? I don't know. But Kansas needs him to perform against this Houston defense. He did last year, and I'll be very interested to see how it works. And Houston, probably they like to be aggressive. They will send doubles, right? And the good thing about Hunter, and we saw it in the TCU game, he's really good at finding the open man and getting assists off of it that's going to lead to a made 3. So Kansas has to be good about finishing those threes if Hunter gets doubled and finds the open man as well. But I think this is going to be a fascinating, super fun matchup at both ends of the court, both ways. High on the go-off meter, the honest answer is kind of no one, because if these are the 2 best defenses in the country, or at the very least, these are 2 of the best 5, I don't know. Kind of no one for the KU side. If I was looking at the Houston side, Cryer usually plays well in Allen Fieldhouse, but if I'm going to pick someone for Kansas, I am going to go with Dickinson. Again, 20 points last year in the meeting in Allen Fieldhouse. I don't know that he'll necessarily always scoring from Hunter, but I could see him having 5 assists. I could see him having 15 points, right? So I think that'll be very interesting. I'm also very curious just to see how Flory performs against their more rugged big men, like the length and the athleticism and the springiness of Flory versus the toughness and the strength of those big men for Houston. I hope this isn't a game that he's in foul trouble, because I can see that kind of being the case, but that'll be interesting. I could also say this, when you go back and look at some of their losses, the players who have gone off, it's players who are willing to let it fly and let it fly from deep or with a slightly contested hand in your face. You have to be willing to take some, maybe higher, not necessarily super tough threes, but ones that aren't wide open and be able to make them, and maybe be able to make them from a few feet behind the 3-point line. And so I looked at Zeke Mayo, who has played really well at home this season and has played really consistently for Kansas, scoring the ball in Big 12 play. And those would be the 2 guys that I'd be looking at here. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back for more KU Houston content.